What's up? What's up? Thanks for joining us again for another Homestead Mastermind. We're doing something a little bit different that I haven't tried before, so hopefully this translates on the video and comes through in a productive and meaningful way. If it doesn't, I'll do better in the future, but this is the best I can do right now. Um, Before we jump into obviously you can see on the screen, hopefully you can anyway, we're going to be talking about plants, and we're going to be going through our edible and medicinal plant workbook. This is something that you hopefully have seen. Well, I know you've seen it if you've taken a plant class with us. And I know or one of our, like, the survival standard, we go through this is our introduction to plants, and I want to cover it now with you as much as I can get through. As We've had some questions about plants, particularly foraging plants. And we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about specific plants because there's uh, an infinite number of plants. I wish I knew exactly how many plants there were, but there's a really large number, enough that you can spend an entire lifetime just learning plants. And it coincides with us now because, like, daylight saving has changed, and the plants in the greenhouse that we've started from seed are probably a little bit early to be going out, but they are going out into the garden. We have some, like, cover on them, but I thought it was a good opportunity, in conjunction with the questions that we have, to talk about uh, plants and introduce you to the edible and medicinal plant workbook if you haven't seen it. It is available as part of our, like, survival manual, which is this book I'll be referencing tonight. It's what we give to our survival standard class, and it's kind of like the background, the base set of knowledge for everything that we teach. And you'll find this edible medicinal plant workbook. When people come visit me for a class, I think it's really important that I might not be able to give you all the information while you're here, but I can give you the information where, if you go through that information enough and follow that path, you can know everything that I have learned over my almost, like, 20 years of, like, learning this stuff, and 12 years of practicing it here on the farm, and plus other. So a long history, and a lot of money has been spent in putting these books together. So we're going to go through the edible and medicinal plant workbook now, and hopefully you can see it, and hopefully this works great, and if not, again, I'm sorry. Okay, here we go. So this is the edible and medicinal plant workbook. And I love this quote from Mark Cuban, who is like a tech guru, but he has this question, or follow your passion. As the if the question is, how do you learn anything? The answer is this quote from Mark Cuban, and he says, follow your passion. I hear it as advice to students and others. What a bunch of bullshit. Everyone is passionate about something. Think of all the failed things people were passionate about. Don't follow your passions, follow your effort. And I really like that quote because I think it applies directly to plants, because they're so expansive. And follow your effort. Like, for me, being a woodworker and working with stuff, working with plants and trees in particular, that might be the inroad for me into the plant kingdom. But if you're, like, really into foraging, or you're really into mushrooms, that we're not going to talk so much about here, but, like, whatever you want to do, if you're a gardener and you like gardening, follow your passion, because that's what you're excited about, and it's easiest to learn things that you're excited about. So don't be, like, uh plowing through the swamp when you could be studying what you're passionate about. And but the most important thing is to start with a plant journal, and or any kind of journaling, because that allows you to go back through uh what you've learned, and have that reference to see how far that you've come. Think about like what the plants look like throughout the year. Like, if you're so in our sit spot that we talk about in permaculture and survival, right? Just learning the landscape over the course of the year before you do anything. You're going to notice like animals, plants, how they change from season to season. How do animals interact with the plants? Do you see the plants in other places? Are they, like, high on a hill or down in a valley? Are they in, like, waterlogged areas? Like, what's the natural environment of the plant, um, and how is it being used by the landscape? These are just a few questions to get your mind going. But the more that you think about plants and the more that you expand your knowledge base, this note or your notebook will become volumes, and you'll be a resource for other people. And we'll get into some books later on, but that might be you one day. Don't overload yourself with plant names. First, have a firm understanding of how plants interact with the landscape and with each other. We're going to talk about plant patterning, and learning the patterns as opposed to individual plants, because our brains are really, really good at picking up patterns, and maybe not so good at picking up individual plants. But I want to start with these rules for wildcrafting. These are the 5 rules that you have to know before you get too far in eating plants. You have to know the plant. And that just doesn't mean like you know its name, but that's the start, is knowing the Latin name, knowing how to harvest it, meaning the right plant part, the right time of the year, and the right place. Like you don't want to be harvesting stuff on the side of the road that's like pulling. Like there are plants called dynamic accumulators that pull everything from the landscape, whether that be like heavy metals or like diesel fuel, like from or like runoff from the road. Don't let that be you harvesting that plant thinking, oh, I know this plant, without knowing where that it came from. That's what that means as far as the right place. And that leads us right into knowing the ecosystem. Don't be harvesting plants from, we did one survival trip in West Virginia, and you could see the on the sides of the banks of the river the contaminated heavy metal collection. And like while in a survival situation that might be all right, I do have a friend that has half of her face is paralyzed from eating contaminated stuff. Granted, that was an animal, she was fishing, but it's still the same thing. Like you have to know the pollution, the runoff of the area, as well as how to store and prepare it, right? If you've uh, stored, um, let's say, wheat, and you've got ergot, and then like now you're feeling really bad or whatever, or you haven't refrigerated, well, that's really meat, but like you have to know how to store it, how to dry it, how to prepare it. That's more with like medicinal stuff, but like tincturing and salves, know the right preparation, so that you're not essentially poisoning yourself. And then you have to know how to propagate that plant. Caretaking versus harvesting, caretaking versus rape and pillaging. Do you want to leave it better than you found it, or do you just want to take and take and take? That's something that you have to decide for yourself. And I think it's really mission dependent too. Like if you're in that survival situation where you know you have to get out, feeding yourself is not a bad option, and just taking and taking. But if you know you want to leave it better than you found it and create landscape that other people can benefit from and learn, you're going to have to caretake that landscape, and that ultimately leaves it better than you found it. We'll talk more about those as we move on. But first, before that, what is a plant, or what are plants? And like autotrophs is another term, but it's things that feed itself through um, photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is the process of taking light from the sun and turning it into glucose that feeds the plant. But if you look around, like the herbs, trees, the grass, pretty much anything that you see and anything that's like a bright, beautiful color on the landscape, that's a plant. Um, and plants are great because they don't run away from us, if we're thinking from a survival aspect. And they're kind of like that base level on the food chain, right? They're there. Herbivores come through, they eat the plants that allow us to eat the herbivores. It's just a way of gathering energy from the sun, and then creating something that other organisms can survive off of while it indeed survives itself. So yeah, so we talked about photosynthesis, and a big part of that is that oxygen is a byproduct of that. and we wouldn't be here breathing oxygen if plants weren't doing that. That if plants didn't have that cycle, there's a great picture I'll show later on. Whatever. It's coming up. I don't need to talk about it just yet. But if you remember back to like, I think sixth grade is when I was introduced to this, the kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Uh, I, that was just beaten into our head by Miss Marshall. But the first name is the genus and the second name is the species. So if you're the example I have here is Verbascum thapsus. But you have to know these binomial nomenclature, because when you talk to people in the common vernacular, right, there are names for plants that change from like holler to holler, particularly in the Appalachians. There's, like one person might call it something, and another person might call it, and they literally live on the same street, and it's the same plant, but you go to the other side of town and there's a different name for it. It's So it's important when we're talking about eating and consuming these plants that we, like we talked about earlier, we know the name and we can name it with the Latin name, um, and because that's what's shared in science. That's how we can communicate these plants over large distances and not be confusing them. And when we look at like edible wild plants and stuff, sure, there's the field guides that we'll talk about. Sure, there's pictures in there, but the name references you can look that up. It's hard to look up a picture without going through um, kind of a choose your own adventure, which we'll do later this evening. Uh, yeah. So actually now that's as I read through this book again, they're actually doing like genetic testing to further refine that way of categorizing plants and organizing them. But kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, and I think they have changed that around the names, but it's still the same category, still the same thing. Um, it is what it is. So let me just read through this because it's got some dates there, and I can't remember all this. I'm not that good, but an incredibly brief, generally agreed to history of very early plant evolution. 3.8 billion years ago, prokaryotes are single cell organisms without membrane bound organelles like bacteria and green algae, ruled by copying themselves through asexual reproduction. So when we think about plant evolution, it's really just how can plants get better at reproducing, and more efficient, and efficiency means having kids that are like robust and can pass on the genetic code to the next generation. That's like all that plants care about, um, for the purposes of like plant evolution. But so when we think about like without having a membrane, there isn't a layer of protection there. So as plants evolved and they group up together, well, as cellular organisms evolve into like multicellular species, uh, they absorbed other single-celled organisms and they form symbiotic relationships like the mitochondria, and like the cell wall, and those things that we talk about in like sixth and seventh grade science, right? But so we're moving through, and then we have like bisexual reproduction, and that allows for different genetic code to be added. And then there's a higher success of or a higher chance of survival of the next generation, just because there's more ways to collect and process energy and more protection in the organism itself. So 900 million years ago, now we have like worms and sponges appearing on the fossil record. Did you know that like a sponge wasn't just something that you bought at the store? Like back in the day, people like dive for those and they're like a sea creature. But that's kind of interesting. I don't also like loofah sponges. We're going to be growing some of those in the garden. Um, though that's not the same. And then, so 570 million years ago, rapid changes in something led to the Cambrian explosion, and that gave like all of these species that, and they don't, and scientists don't know like what that was, but the Cambrian explosion, very cool. And now I have stuff like herbivores, jellyfish, insects, spiders. Like there's real animals as we know them there. And if I take a second to talk about fungus, fungus is a third type of life that secretes enzymes that break down other organic matter. And it's just an important part. We're not going to be talking about like mushrooms so much because there's too much. There's just too much, and I'm not that guy. If you want to know about mushrooms, like Paul Stamets is the guy to talk to. But it's worth mentioning that like they have a function, um and they allow for like the circle of things breaking down in the landscape. So now we get into the fun stuff, the evolution of land plants. Not that that wasn't fun, but whatever. So uh life evolved from the sea, right? And the use of water is what allowed for like uh sexual production or sexual reproduction of plants. So spore-like plants like mosses that lack a vascular system, they have to be near water for nutrients to move effectively relative to their small size, right? So if we think about mosses and like they're very low, and then um we have like the next stage up is like ferns and horsetails, and they have a vascular system that can move nutrients a little bit higher, and that allows for the plants to spread their seed a little bit further, and then makes for faster reproduction. As we talked about earlier, plant evolution is trying to increase that efficiency. So then again, we have gymnosperms that are plants with naked seeds. And so they don't have like this layer of protection. Pine trees are an example for that. They like look at like pine cones, you know what I mean? Like it's the seed is like right there, you know. Um, and then we have flowering plants, and those like berries and fruits and grasses, and they use insects to like kind of pollinate as well as the wind, but they are covering that seed, and so that it's even more protected as it goes to the dirt and can spread the genetic code faster. So think that like 9 out of 10 plants fall into that flowering plant category. Even if it's a grass, right? We don't have to see the flower like 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 a daffodil or something. We don't have to see the flower. But that's you know, we don't have to see the flower. Grasses have a flower as well. Trying to go to the next page. Cool. This is one of the pictures that I wanted to show you that I stole from somebody. This is not mine, but it's an amazing. If I can turn this somehow, I don't know how to do that, but you'll have to bear with me. Um, I don't know. That makes me nervous. Whatever. So we start down here. Just turn your heads, right? The plant family tree. Um, and this is like the green algae, primordial ooze. Uh, down here at the bottom. And as we move through evolution, we see the more protection, more vascular systems, more ways to spread that genetic material, and with higher and higher probability that it will go to the next generation. So we have like modern green algae, seedless, non-vascular, like true mosses are up here. Like there were a lot of moss people will be like, oh, that's moss. No. Then there's club mosses, and then this is like the seedless vascular system where they're just kind of like using the ocean and the waves. And then we have like trees, gymnosperms that open seed. Did you like trees are like they predate fungus and that like for the longest time there was just like trees would like fall over and just be there. And then it wasn't until like the evolution of fungus that started breaking that down that gave the like the heavy duff material that we see in like forests and stuff. But then we have come up here and we have monocots and dicots or the other one. So monocots are like one seed and then dicots are like two seeds. Here they are. But like as we go out, there's more and more protection covering that seed and more energy that will allow for the spreading of genetic material. Cool. I want to talk about identifying plants through patterns. This is like the fastest way to know a lot of plants quickly, other than following your effort and following what you're passionate about. But and hopefully I can. So let me read this quote from Thomas Eipel, which is if you're looking at playing games with people, he is a wonderful resource for those games. But he is responsible for this game, Wildcraft. It's like shoots and ladders, but learning plants and families. But the one that we're gonna take a look at is called Sean Leia's Quest, and it's a card game that gives you these cards that I don't actually know the rules, but I'll tell you how I play it. You lay these out, and they talk about the characteristics of plant families, and then he gives you a bunch of pictures here of cards, and you can go through and find out and lay them uh, into the family that they belong to. Oh, here we go. So it's like, oh, here's a card. But let me take you over here and I'll show you what those look like. So here we go. So these are really common uh, patterns for naming plants, and they come from this game, Sean Leia's Quest. These are like the plant family cards that I showed you a second ago. So if we learn these and we know them, then it really just takes off. So if we could start with like the lily family, there's and I don't think I have further descriptions of like these parts, but if you look in any like botany book, you'll see all of these are scientific names for describing the parts of plants. Um, so like the lilies and they showy monocot flowers. They six stamens with three pistils and three sepals and three petals, all of the same size and color. We move over to the grass family. So here's a fun thing, right? I'm going to teach you 4,000 plants right now, and they're all edible. It's the grass family. They're wind pollinated flowers, like corn is a grass, wheat. This is most of the American diet comes from the grass family, whether it be like wheat, rye, barley, um, corn. Corn is huge, particularly in feeding animals, and that's just people powered evolution of how can we breed a better and better grass. Um, and if you look at corn, it just looks like a big picture of what's up there on the screen right now. Um, they're petalless, wind pollinated monocot flowers with stamens and pistils enclosed in bracts. And so like you see it when you get corn on the side of the road and you shuck it, that's just a giant thing of grass. But wheat looks the same, all those things that I just mentioned before. And so if you go out in your yard, you can, now I'm not, if you're spraying your yard with pesticides and stuff, probably not the best idea, but you can go out and eat those grasses. So how do you do that, right? If you eat it, or if your dog eats it, he throws it up, right? I know Mr. Sid does that, but if that's so we can't process cellulose. So the way that like a cow does, but the way that they do it is by having multiple stomachs. But the way that we do it is have to chew and then swallow the not the grass, we spit that out, but swallow the nutrients from the from chewing that plant. And that does give some like caloric intake, particularly in like survival situations. Like you should see the farmer, with a piece of grass in their mouth. So grass is edible. The mustard family, mostly weedy animals. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but you see these plant families, and if you know these can really expedite your plant learning. So I highly recommend Sean Leia's Quest and getting that card game, playing it with play it by yourself a whole lot, and then play it with your friends and impress them with their plant knowledge because lots of folks don't know plants, and so it's a fun way to kind of show off. But they'll pick up quickly because that game is just so fun, and it's a great way to learn plants. So let's go back to the what we were talking about before. So annual, perennial, and biennial plants. You'll hear that, and it just refers to how many years it takes before the plants go to seed. A lot of the things that we plant in the garden, like tomatoes, beans, broccoli, you see the list here, are examples of annual plants. But an annual plant just has a lifespan of one season. So we have to continually, like, we don't have to continually plow, but commercial agriculture will plow, turn, disc, and then plant those plants back all the time. Where and we don't have to do that, but the seeds that if we leave it like say we leave a tomato on the vine, that tomato will fall, and then we'll have like another grow uh another tomato will grow from that tomato that falls. Whereas like binding perennial plants, they just come back year after year after year, like uh not so much like rhubarb maybe, but I was gonna say asparagus, but that's like a root plant. That's not the same. But uh oh man, we run out of time all the time. Whatever. I got 10 minutes. We'll pick this up here next week at the same time, I guess. But uh and then we have biennial plants, like my favorite is mullein, and that grows in like heavily disturbed areas and compacted areas, but it has like that basal rosette that comes out the first year, and then the second year it sends up the stalk with a beautiful yellow flower. But it takes 2 years to grow. Um, and that's a good medicinal plant to know too. Uh, So here's a great quote from the Sean Leia's Quest guy again. Related plants have similar characteristics for identification and often have similar uses. For example, in the mustard family, all mustard flowers have 5 petals with 6 stamens, 4 tall, 2 short. There's 3,200 species, and they're all edible. So we just learned 7,200 plants in this one class. So that's pretty good. I'm trying to go to the next part. Okay, there we go. Sorry. Cool. So plants exist on a spectrum. I guess everything is on a spectrum, and we're going to talk about the toxicity spectrum. And so on one side we have like superfoods, like asparagus or alfalfa, and broccoli. Though I'm not mentioning broccoli on this side of the spectrum because there are a lot of people that don't like broccoli and actually have a genetic like propensity to not like uh crust they don't like cruciferous vegetables, right? So that means like lettuce, even broccoli, cauliflower. In the middle, we have some things that aren't super toxic, but if we have too much of it, it is toxic. And then we have on the other side of the spectrum stuff that will mess you up pretty quick, like the daturas or the uh, gypsum weed around here. Like so, some plants will make you die, some plants will make you trip and die. But we say around here everything is edible once. But some of the poisonous plants that I definitely want you to know, and that's why we have a picture here, is poison ivy. And if you see a hairy vine climbing up a tree with leaves of three, let it be. That's the phrase proceed with caution. Now, you might not see the leaves of three, right? They might be further up in the canopy of the tree, but they are there. They're just not getting the sunlight and they're climbing up to get it. So, a hairy vine is a good indication that, like, that might be poison ivy, poison oak, something you want to leave um, to itself. It's not a grapevine if it's hairy. Uh, And so Queen Anne's lace is a common survival food, and there's two aster family plants that look like Queen Anne's lace that you definitely don't want to get near. Well, water hemlock and poison hemlock. Know those as you start this journey. Peterson is one of the most famous field guide writers. And if you've done edible plants here, you've seen this one. If you've done edible plants anywhere, this is kind of like the go-to. And he has some principles for edible wild plants safety. And this comes directly from his book, so I want to read that verbatim to you. Learn to recognize and avoid the common poisonous plants in your area. Teach children not to put plants in their mouth. Uh, and that's something we have a hard time with insurance about. It's like there's a great fear of people just like putting plants in their mouth. And I personally don't know anybody that's died from eating plants, but I do know a lot of people that have freaked themselves out by thinking that, like, oh, that's not a plant. Like, I shouldn't have eaten that, right? So like don't like play tricks on your mind just because you ate something. You're probably gonna be all right. But know that, like, you do your research before you get into that. So teach children not to put plants in their mouth. Do not use any plant that you cannot possibly identify as edible. And there's actually um, this guy, Samuel Thayer, is an amazing researcher into plants, and this is his newest field guide that I haven't like read all the way through, but it's like one of the biggest ones that I've seen because it's so comprehensive. And he's like a really amazing researcher. He actually tracked down so many edible plant people are just copying what other people have said, and he tracked down. I need to remember the plant exactly, but there was one plant that was copied for like generations of like, here's how you eat it, here's how you prepare the plant. But it was actually a miss note. Like, they took the note from the plant that was on this page for the plant that was on the opposite page, and it just progressed through the literature as like truth. So you don't know until you know, and you have to like this is why journaling is so important, and like going slow will save your life. So don't assume that plants are superficially resemble edible plants are in themselves edible. Like Queen Anne's lace and hemlock is a great example of that. Um, when collecting an edible plant, make sure you're to not include parts from nearby poisonous plants, right? So if they look the same, chances are they like the same habitat, which means they could be in a field together. And so you're just like grabbing stuff, and it's like, oops, don't make that mistake. Do not collect plants that have been recently sprayed with insecticides or grow in contaminated water or along margins of heavily traveled roadways. One, because like if it hits a road top, it's washing, water hits a road top when it rains, it washes all the car fluids into that ditch. And if you're harvesting in the ditch, just don't do that. But also, if it's a survival situation, do what you got to. But if you're on the side of the road and it's a survival situation, just, I don't know, you did it to yourself. Uh, Be absolutely certain which parts of a plant should be collected and what season, as well as the proper way to use them. This is essentially just what we talked about before. Sample unfamiliar plants sparingly at first. So this is a great method that I've seen. Some people will take a leaf and after they've gotten the identification pretty close, but they don't know, they might rub it on their arm and see if they get an allergic reaction. Now, this isn't like they're not like, oh, I didn't get an allergic reaction. Let me eat it now. Like, so you rub it on, wait a day. At that point, you might take a little bit, bite it off, keep it under your tongue, and then go on and see how you react over the course of the day. And then you could maybe start eating some, like, start small and then you could eat more and more. But that's a way to know. And I'm thankful in the last like minute that we have, we've gotten to this point. And if you can take one thing from this call, it's that the cycle of birth, growth, maturation, decline, and death, it happens in everything, right? So I'll say it again. The cycle of birth, growth, maturation, decline, and death. It happens in plants, and energy is moved to where it's most needed. And so identifying where the energy is will result in the most calorie dense food for us. So in the spring, flowers, shoots, buds, and young leaves require the plant's energy to grow. As the summer approaches, the plant shifts energy into flowers, fruits, and berries. And then the seeds and the fruit store that energy for the next generation. And those are mostly present in the fall. And during the winter, the plants go dormant and the energy is stored in the roots. So think about that again, like birth, maturation, decline, and death. It happens in empires, it happens in plants. And think about that when you're harvesting plants. We'll pick up here next week, most likely, unless there's another topic that's like burning into people's souls. But we got a lot more to talk about with plants. So thanks for joining us. And if there's any questions, I'm going to stop the recording and we'll get into a little bit more discussion.